Every night the world ended. The sun died, swallowed whole by the western horizon. To the ancient Egyptians, this wasn't poetry, it was fact. They believed that as darkness fell, the god Ra himself plunged into the underworld, sailing through a place so real it was mapped, guarded, and feared. But what if that journey wasn't just symbolic? What if those maps, those serpent-haunted gates, and those stars overhead pointed to something the priests of Egypt actually saw or even built beneath their feet? Something that lived and moved beneath the sand. So take a breath and let the Nile's night air settle around you. The torches dim. The world outside falls silent. Now we begin to descend into a world that was never meant for the living. Imagine standing at the edge of the desert thousands of years ago, watching the sun dissolve into red dust behind the mountains of the west. To the Egyptians, that was the gateway, the beginning of the Duat, the underworld through which Ra would travel until dawn. Each night was a perilous voyage through chaos and shadow, ending only if the god could defeat his enemies and rise again in light. Pharaohs and priests built entire religions around this single event. They carved its stages into tombs, painted its gates on walls, and whispered its passwords into the ears of the dead. It wasn't just myth, it was a manual, a map of eternity written in the language of stars and stone. And the deeper you look, the more it starts to feel less like legend and more like something recorded, remembered. Because hidden beneath those stories lies a pattern. The same 12 divisions, the same rivers of fire, the same strange names repeated across dynasties. What were they describing so carefully? A spiritual journey or a physical one? Were these elaborate descriptions of the sun's path through darkness, or the instructions for a real, secret ritual that took place every single night in the halls beneath the earth? Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. Because tonight, we're not just telling a myth, we're following a god into the dark. You can almost feel it, the heat still radiating from the stone long after sunset, the faint scent of dust and age clinging to the air. Egypt's night is never truly dark. The desert glows with memory. Somewhere beneath your feet, the priests once believed lay a mirrored world, the Duat. Not a land of fiction, but a geography as precise as any on Earth. The pyramid texts carved 5 millennia ago describe its channels, islands, caverns, and rivers of flame with the tone of surveyors, not poets. Each detail feels mapped, catalogued, remembered. And as modern archaeologists have found, the ancients may not have been entirely wrong. The Nile itself was said to have a twin below its waters, mirrored by a river of darkness flowing through the underworld. When explorers first descended into the burial chambers of the pharaohs, they found murals tracing that current, showing Ra sailing across black water on his golden barque. It's easy to dismiss it as religious art until you notice how the walls are arranged, the gates, the bends, even the islands drawn in sequence. The same order, the same proportions repeated from tomb to tomb. It is almost as if these chambers were segments of one vast diagram distributed across the land, like pieces of a single buried map. Some Egyptologists now suspect the descriptions of the Duat were never meant as fantasy, but as reflections of the terrain the priests knew intimately, the flooded caverns beneath the desert, carved by ancient rivers before the Nile took its present course. The word Duat itself, in some translations, implies a passageway or conduit, a path between worlds. Could it be that when the priests spoke of guiding Ra through the depths, they were also describing a literal descent into the labyrinthine spaces under their temples, the so-called fields of reeds that mirrored the wetlands of the delta above? Archaeological evidence offers strange support. Beneath Dendera, Saqqara, and even Luxor, there are tunnels, sealed chambers whose purposes remain unclear. In 2017, when Muon's scans of the Great Pyramid revealed a mysterious void behind the Grand Gallery, some researchers noted its orientation matched a line in the Duat, the corridor where Ra rests before renewal. Coincidence, perhaps. But even coincidences can whisper. You might recall how in the first section, we watched the sun vanish behind the western mountains, that liminal boundary the Egyptians called the horizon, the Akhet. Those same cliffs west of Thebes conceal the Valley of the Kings, and beneath that valley runs a series of tombs and corridors that eerily align with the Amduat's descriptions of the night journey: 12 segments, 12 gates each, guarded by divine figures. If myth and architecture overlap so neatly, is it any wonder that some early explorers suspected a master plan, that the entire necropolis was built as a replica or a functional simulator of Ra's path through the underworld? There's a forgotten detail in the 19th century diaries of explorer Giovanni Belzoni, who once described a chamber beneath Seti Firn's tomb where water still pooled, fed by unseen springs. He noted carvings showing boats floating between mounds that looked suspiciously like real geography. He thought he had found a symbolic Nile of the dead. What if instead he had stumbled upon a physical echo of the cosmic river itself? Of course, not everyone agrees. Many Egyptologists caution against taking these connections too literally. To them, the Duat's topography is psychological, not geological, a landscape of the soul, not of stone. Yet there's something stubborn in those repeating measurements, those precisely angled corridors, those shafts that seem to point to stars, yet also plunge deep into rock. You can feel it when you read the hieroglyphs aloud. The priests weren't describing dreams. They were documenting a system. Some scholars now revisit the question with new tools. LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar have detected anomalies stretching beneath the western bank of the Nile. Long cavities, linear passages, shapes that could be natural fissures or ancient works hidden by time. The debate remains open: were these symbolic architectures, or did the Egyptians believe they had found actual entrances to the realm of Ra for the ancients? Perhaps there was no distinction. The physical and the spiritual coexisted like mirrored currents. Every cave, every hidden tunnel, every secret tomb was another horizon, another chance to reenact the sun's descent and rebirth. To walk beneath the earth was to sail with Ra himself. And as we move deeper into this mystery, one question begins to linger: if the Duat was a map, what destination did it lead to? The next chapter may hold the first clue in the image of a ship that sailed not on water, but on eternity itself. You can almost see it now, the golden barque gliding across a sea of stars. Its prow shaped like a serpent's head, its hull carved with the names of gods. To the ancient Egyptians, this was no ornament. It was a vehicle, the boat of millions of years, the ship that carried Ra through the night. Every temple wall, every tomb ceiling seems to show it, sailing through impossible darkness, guarded by divine oarsmen and steered by magic itself. But what if this was more than mythic imagery? What if the boat was a kind of machine, a symbolic technology of transformation designed not to carry a god, but to teach humans how to die and rise again? The first clue lies in the precision of its design. In tombs from the Valley of the Kings, the barque's proportions remain eerily consistent, a crescent-shaped vessel with a raised prow and stern balanced by a central cabin. Egyptologists like Eric Hornung note how the cabin often bears a solar disk, flanked by cobras, symbols of protection and power. But among the hieroglyphs, there's a word repeatedly carved next to it: Neset. It doesn't just mean boat. It means the means of crossing. Crossing what exactly? Not the Nile. Something deeper. Something between life and death. You might remember the mirrored geography we uncovered in the last section, the Duat, as both map and metaphor. In that vision, the barque becomes the ultimate guide. The priests believed that every soul, including the pharaohs, must learn to navigate those hidden waters using Ra's voyage as a model. But that model wasn't static. The texts describe how Ra's vessel constantly changed form, becoming serpent scarab ram as it passed through each gate. It adapted to survive. In a way, it was alive. Some esoteric scholars, perhaps too eager for modern parallels, have compared it to a spacecraft. Others, more grounded, see it as an initiation device, a symbolic process by which the spirit shed its mortal cargo to travel light enough for dawn. There's a fascinating detail often overlooked. In the tomb of Seti, the barque is depicted not on water, but on a band of stars. Each oar corresponds to a constellation, each rope to a lunar path. Could this suggest the Egyptians viewed the underworld as an astronomical space, a cosmic river threading between stars? If so, the boat of millions of years wasn't meant to float on the Nile, but on the celestial current itself, what we might call the Milky Way. Ancient sky watchers saw it as a glowing stream dividing heaven in two. The dead, it was said, must sail across it to reach the field of reeds. And yet, deep beneath temples, archaeologists have found chambers shaped like hulls carved from bedrock, as if the priests had been constructing physical echoes of that divine vessel. In Abydos, a subterranean structure known as the Osireion contains a long central platform surrounded by water, a symbolic dock, where some say the barque of Ra might have rested during rituals of renewal. Some researchers even believe these architectural copies were part of an elaborate rite in which initiates symbolically boarded the god's ship, underwent simulated death, and emerged reborn, their spirits sailing with Ra into the morning. But not everyone agrees on what that means. Mainstream Egyptology insists these scenes were purely religious allegories, not evidence of actual practice. Still, the consistency of the details is difficult to ignore. The Duat describes specific stages of the journey, the moment Ra meets the gods of the hour, the time he merges with Osiris, the instant he rekindles the solar flame. Each passage is structured like a technical manual, precise, repetitive, layered with instructions. It's as if they were documenting a repeatable process, a cosmic routine rehearsed in temples night after night. Think about it. The priests of Ra were astronomers, architects, magicians, and mathematicians. They aligned entire monuments to track the sun's movement with impossible accuracy. If they could command stone to obey the light, perhaps they believed they could command the soul to do the same. The boat of millions of years wasn't merely carrying Ra, it was carrying a principle, the physics of resurrection. One modern Egyptologist, Dr. Kara Cooney, calls this the theology of motion. She argues that the Egyptians didn't see immortality as stillness, but as constant renewal. Ra survives not because he avoids death, but because he keeps moving through it. In that sense, the boat isn't just myth, it's instruction. Keep sailing, keep transforming, keep crossing the night. And yet the question remains, where exactly was this night? Was it purely cosmic, or could it have been something the priests physically entered, a tunnel, a chamber, a ritual space beneath the temples of the West? Because if the Duat truly mirrored the land above, and if every stage of the barque's journey matched real passages underground, then perhaps the ancient priests weren't just telling stories of gods. They were mapping their own experiments with eternity. Somewhere in that darkness, the next clue awaits. They called it the 12 gates of the night, each one guarded, each one measured, each one hiding something only the initiated could pass through. And through those gates, Ra's ship would sail over and over again until the first light returned. The night was not endless. It had boundaries, 12 of them. Each one a threshold, a trial, a gate. To the priests of Ra, these were not metaphors, but fixed points in a journey more exact than any map. The Duat describes them in detail: the first hour, where Ra enters the western horizon; the second, where he is greeted by the gods of decay; the third, where serpents coil around the river of night. Each gate had its own guardians, passwords, and dangers. Together, they formed a cycle so precise that it could be charted, timed, and repeated. It was not mythic chaos, it was cosmic order hidden inside darkness. You can imagine the priests standing beneath temple ceilings painted with constellations, reading those ancient texts by flickering oil lamps. They believed that as the sun god sailed through these 12 divisions, the universe itself was recalibrated. The stars were clocks, the gates were coordinates. Every night the same cosmic ritual replayed death, renewal, and dawn. But behind the poetry lies something colder, almost scientific. Many of those gates align with measurable astronomical events: the transit of specific stars, the rising of Orion's belt, the unseen path of the Milky Way. To pass through each gate was to pass through a segment of the heavens. The underworld wasn't underground at all, it was overhead. Some Egyptologists have noticed that the Duat's 12 hours correspond roughly to the 12 deacons or star groups used by Egyptian astronomers to tell time through the night. As the hours passed, new stars rose on the eastern horizon, marking the boat's progress through the sky. To the priests, Ra's journey through the underworld wasn't superstition. It was a mirror of observable celestial mechanics. The god's struggles, his battles with serpents, his encounters with shadowy beings, all of them described shifts in the heavens. The serpent Apophis wasn't just evil. He was the darkness that swallowed the sun below the horizon, the chaos between two measurable lights. But even within that order, there were mysteries. The gates were drawn not just as portals, but as chambers, each with a symbolic shape. Some looked like tomb corridors, others like tunnels. In the fifth hour, Ra's barque passes through a long enclosed serpent, an image that some scholars think might describe an eclipse, the sun devoured by shadow before emerging reborn. Others interpret it as a descent into the earth, an initiation tunnel meant to be walked by the living during sacred rites. In that reading, the Duat was both star chart and temple architecture, a map that could be projected above or carved below. You might recall the boat we studied in the previous section, the vessel of transformation. Its voyage through these 12 gates completes the equation. The boat is the mechanism. The gates are the program. Each hour required actions, spells, offerings, gestures. The texts use the language of precision. He speaks the words. The gate opens. He passes. That rhythm sounds less like religion and more like a code. Was Ra's nightly passage a cosmic operating system reset every dawn to keep the world running? Modern astronomy adds a strange echo. In the precession of the equinoxes, the sun appears to shift through 12 constellations over thousands of years, the zodiac's great cycle. Could the 12 gates of the night have been Egypt's first recognition of that grand motion compressed into one mythic night? It's impossible to prove, but the symmetry is almost too perfect. As above, so below the night sky, as the underworld's mirror, the constellations as the guardians of each threshold. And yet the priests didn't stop at the sky. Beneath the temples of Abydos and Edfu, archaeologists have found subterranean passages painted with the same 12-hour divisions, the same rows of deities guarding portals. Were these sacred simulations built so the high priests could physically walk Ra's journey during their rituals? Imagine the effect, passing from one dimly lit chamber to another. reciting invocations. As the air thickened, the torches burning lower until the final gate opened into a chamber bathed in dawn-colored light. Death rehearsal by architecture. Some scholars argue that these symbolic journeys were meant to teach that no darkness was final, that the pattern of descent and return was woven into every life, every season, every breath. Others see something deeper, a human attempt to map consciousness itself. The 12 gates become stages of inner transformation, echoing not astronomy, but psychology. The enemies are fears. The serpents are obstacles of spirit. The rebirth at dawn is enlightenment. Still, one question lingers in every debate: how much of this was meant literally? Did the Egyptians believe Ra truly sailed through 12 cosmic gates? Or was that language a veil for something else? A ritual technology, a system for aligning the human soul with the rhythm of the sun. What they built, what they painted, and what they whispered in the dark all point to one conclusion. The Egyptians weren't guessing at immortality. They were measuring it. And as Ra sailed through the 12th gate, where the sky brightened, where night and day touched for a heartbeat, the serpent of chaos stirred again, waiting to swallow him once more. The journey never ended. It repeated, an eternal maintenance of light. But even the god of the sun could not rest easy, for something waited in those dark waters, a force that refused to die, and which the priests came to call by name: Apophis. Darkness was never empty to the Egyptians. It had shape, sound, appetite. Every night as Ra's barque slipped into the underworld's waters, something stirred in those depths, a force older than light, hungrier than time itself. They called it Apophis, the serpent of chaos. Not a creature of mere myth, but the living symbol of everything that threatened cosmic order, decay, rebellion, unmaking. When the priests of Ra performed their midnight rituals, they weren't only honoring a god, they were fighting for existence. Imagine the scene inside a temple at Heliopolis. The air thick with incense, the walls trembling from chants. The priests would gather before a clay effigy of Apophis, stabbing it with knives, binding it in red cord, and burning it to ash. The ritual was called the banishing of Apep. Every night it was repeated, as if the sun itself depended on their precision, and perhaps to them it did. Because Ra's journey through the underworld was not a peaceful drift. It was a war. Each night he faced the serpent, who tried to stop the dawn from coming. But beneath this mythic battle lies something stranger. Scholars have noted that Apophis, the embodiment of chaos, appears not only in religious texts, but also in astronomical ones. His attacks coincide with the darkest hours of night, when the stars seemed to vanish, when clouds or sandstorms obscured the heavens. The priests recorded these moments meticulously, as if Apophis was not an idea, but an event. Some have suggested these descriptions might recall real celestial phenomena, perhaps solar eclipses, comets, or sudden darkenings of the sky. The god's victory then wasn't only spiritual. It was observational, light conquering shadow in the most literal sense. And yet Apophis wasn't always an outsider. In the oldest coffin texts, chaos isn't evil, it's simply what exists before order. Some philosophers within the priesthood even wrote that without Apophis, Ra's strength would fade, for the sun draws power from opposition. That idea would echo through Egyptian thought for centuries, creation born from conflict. The serpent was both enemy and necessity. To destroy him was to renew the world. You might remember from the last section how Ra passed through 12 gates, each guarded and measured. The serpent attacked in the 7th hour, precisely the midpoint of night. There, Ra's ship halted. The gods of the underworld joined battle. Lightning flashed across painted walls, as priests reenacted the struggle in torchlight, their voices rising with the rhythm of storm. When the texts say Ra pierced the serpent with the spear of fire, it might describe the return of starlight, or even the first hint of dawn at the horizon. A modern Egyptologist, John Darnell, once remarked that the Egyptians treated darkness not as nothingness, but as a thing that had to be negotiated. The rituals against Apophis were that negotiation. They kept chaos manageable. In a world where sandstorms could blot out the sun and the Nile could flood without warning, the myth made sense. To defeat the serpent was to believe the sun would rise again. But what if the myth carried another layer? Some researchers see in Apophis a reflection of inner struggle, the chaos within the human spirit. The nightly war of Ra might have been the metaphor for the nightly battles of the self-reason versus fear, clarity versus confusion. In initiatory rites, the priest descended into total darkness, surrounded by hissed invocations of serpents, to confront his own Apophis before emerging purified. Death and rebirth weren't only celestial, they were psychological. Still, physical traces of this cosmic enemy remain oddly literal. In the tomb of Ramses VI, a vast mural shows the serpent sliced into 14 pieces, each part guarded by a deity with a knife. The precision of that number has puzzled scholars. 14 hours of night, 14 divisions of decay, or perhaps, as some archaeoastronomers whisper, 14 lunar stations, the serpent not a creature, but a pattern of eclipses winding through the months. If true, then Apophis was astronomy wrapped in theology, chaos mapped and conquered. Of course, not all Egyptologists agree. Many caution against imposing modern logic on ancient devotion. To them, the serpent's defeat was faith, not formula. Yet even they admit the consistency is unnerving. The same patterns, the same hour of conflict, the same words of power repeated for 2,000 years. Religion rarely keeps its rituals so exact without reason. And somewhere between those rituals and the starry sky, the priests began to believe they could help the god. Their chants, their offerings, their daggers of bronze, it all mattered. They were crew aboard the sun's barque, defending light itself. And perhaps that was the secret. Egypt never wrote down that the gods needed them as much as they needed the gods. But victory was temporary. Every dawn was borrowed time. For even as the serpent was cut apart, he whispered, "I will return." And he did, night after night, endlessly, until one generation of priests began to wonder whether Ra's battles were not happening in the heavens at all, but deep beneath their own feet. It begins with silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, that hums in the stone beneath your feet. You are standing inside a tomb deep beneath the cliffs of Thebes, where air hasn't moved for 3,000 years. The torchlight trembles, and on the walls, lines of hieroglyphs ripple like breath. They tell of a place within the underworld, where Ra must rest before renewal, a chamber of the heart. For centuries, no one knew what that meant. But now, with modern eyes and instruments, we are starting to find clues. In 2017, a team of physicists aimed muon detectors at the Great Pyramid of Khufu, expecting nothing but empty stone. What they found instead was a void 30 meters long, sealed and unreachable, running parallel to the Grand Gallery. It wasn't an accident of construction. It was deliberate. When the discovery was announced, Egyptologists were careful to avoid speculation. Still, many whispered about the Duat, the ancient text describing the hidden chamber where the sun god pauses to be revived by unseen forces. The alignment of the void directly along the pyramid's solar axis was difficult to ignore. The Egyptians believed the heart was not merely an organ, but the seat of consciousness weighed after death against the feather of truth. In the Book of the Dead, the deceased says, "My heart is mine in the house of hearts." That phrase appears again in the Duat, where Ra's own heart is repaired by the gods in the middle of the night. If the Great Pyramid was a tomb for Khufu, why would it contain a chamber dedicated to renewal? Unless, as some scholars suggest, the pyramid wasn't only a burial monument, it was a model of the Duat itself, designed to imitate Ra's journey from death to dawn. You might recall from our previous chapter how Apophis represented the unmaking of light, the necessary darkness that tested the god each night. If so, then the hidden chamber might symbolize what comes after that battle stillness. Regeneration, a cosmic heartbeat beginning again. Inside this pause, Ra fuses with Osiris, the god of the dead, and together they become one being, the promise of resurrection embodied. It's a concept as old as Egypt itself. To be reborn, even the sun must die. When radar scans of the Valley of the Kings revealed unexplored cavities beneath Tutankhamun's tomb, speculation erupted that these voids might connect to an unseen network, a labyrinth hinted at in Greek texts. The notion of a subterranean world beneath Egypt isn't new. Herodotus spoke of vast halls beneath the city of Min, where priests guarded the secrets of the gods. In 1940, explorer André Pochon claimed to have found sealed tunnels near the Sphinx, leading to a hall of records. Most archaeologists dismissed his claims, but the idea refused to die. Even Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, claimed that knowledge of humanity's origins lay buried beneath the paw. It sounds like fantasy, until you remember how many myths eventually proved to have foundations in stone. Still, we don't need prophecy to see the pattern. Many tombs of the New Kingdom mimic the Amduat's design, exactly corridors descending through 12 divisions, culminating in a hidden chamber where the god is reborn as light. The tomb of Thutmose III, for example, contains a circular crypt at its end, painted with stars, snakes, and solar disks, an entire cosmos in miniature. Egyptologists call it the solar womb. The pharaoh buried at its center was not laid to rest. He was placed in orbit. But beyond the archaeology, there is something psychological here, something that lingers in the way the Egyptians imagined death. The hidden chamber is the point where fear turns into faith, where motion ceases and meaning begins. In their vision, the soul had to pass through this stillness to emerge renewed. Perhaps that is why the priests built these spaces so carefully, carving silence itself into the heart of their monuments. Modern science can measure their dimensions, scan their stone, but it cannot quite touch their purpose. Were these chambers used in rituals of rebirth, where initiates symbolically died before re-emerging into light? Or were they merely symbolic, sealed forever, their power in their inaccessibility? One theory suggests that the pyramid's internal design served as a resonant chamber, amplifying sound and vibration during funerary rites. In that sense, the heart wasn't metaphor, it was literal, a place where energy gathered, pulsed, renewed. Whatever the truth, the Egyptians made one thing clear: no one reached dawn without first passing through the hidden heart. And somewhere within that stillness, something waited, a secret, known only to the priests who guarded the path. Because Ra's journey wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. And those who followed him into the dark believed that through understanding, they could share his fate. Soon we'll meet those followers, the men who tried to walk where gods had sailed. They were called the servants of the light. And their lives, as we'll see, were shaped entirely by the shadows they chose to enter. You can picture them moving through the torchlight, faces half-hidden, robes the color of midnight, their shaven heads glistening like small moons in the dark. These were the servants of the light, the priests who believed that by retracing Ra's journey through the underworld, they could taste eternity while still alive. They didn't just worship the sun, they rehearsed its death. In Heliopolis, the city of the sun, the high priests built rituals that mirrored each hour of Ra's voyage. At dusk, they sealed themselves in underground chambers, lighting only the faintest oil lamps so the world above vanished. There they began their descent. 12 invocations, 12 passages, 12 transformations. They believed the Duat wasn't a place they traveled to. After death, it was a dimension they could enter through ritual, a consciousness shift. To walk the path of Ra was to become him for a moment, before returning to the surface, reborn. We often imagine Egypt's priests as distant and ceremonial, but the reality was far more intimate and far more dangerous. Their power rested on mastery of balance, keeping order Ma'at against chaos Esfet. Each dawn depended on their performance. If they failed, if the chants faltered, if the offerings were wrong, the sun might not rise. To them, this wasn't superstition, it was maintenance. Existence itself was a fragile machine that required tuning, and the priests were its engineers. Texts from the Temple of Abydos describe initiations so secret that even scribes hesitated to record them. A candidate would spend days fasting, then descend into a tunnel beneath the sanctuary. He carried a small amulet, the Eye of Ra, meant to guide him through symbolic darkness. Within, he would be confronted by images of the underworld serpents, gates, gods of judgment. He would speak the passwords taught by his elders, crossing from one chamber to the next, until he reached the sanctum known as the Chamber of Becoming. There he would lie on a stone slab carved like a boat and remain motionless until dawn. If he emerged alive, he was reborn a son of Ra. Some historians suggest these rites may have involved hallucinogenic incense, rhythmic drumming, and sensory deprivation techniques meant to induce visions. In that altered state, initiates described feeling the pull of another world, drifting through lightless water, seeing stars swirl above them like molten gold, hearing the hiss of Apophis from beneath their feet. It sounds like myth, but modern neuropsychology would recognize it as the classic pattern of near-death experience, the body still, the mind unmoored. The priests, it seems, had learned to simulate death to glimpse immortality. But what truly set them apart was their discipline. They recorded every step, every word, every movement. The instructions for navigating the underworld, what later became the Duat and the Book of Gates, were first oral, passed from master to apprentice. Each generation refined them, adding observations, adjusting alignments, comparing celestial positions with ritual hours. It was an evolving science disguised as religion. Their gods were metaphors, their miracles methods, and through it all, they saw themselves not as worshippers, but as co-pilots. When they raised their voices in the dark, they were manning the oars of Ra's boat, helping him through the 12 gates. They believed that human devotion fueled the divine engine. Without the living one, him says the dead cannot rise. Without the priest, Ra cannot steer his way through the serpent's coil. It's a strikingly modern idea that the universe requires consciousness to persist, that reality itself might be collaborative. You might remember from the previous chapter, the hidden chamber of the heart, where Ra paused before rebirth. In temple initiations, this moment was replicated when the priest lay in perfect stillness, waiting for the first light to return. The silence was so absolute that they said one could hear the beating of the earth's heart beneath the stone. That pause, that stillness, was the key. To awaken again, you had to die first, completely, willingly, beautifully. We have fragments of what they saw when the light returned. One inscription from Dendera speaks of a door opened in the chest of darkness, and the soul walked through it into gold. Another describes a field of reeds where the sky bends low to touch the river. These aren't just poetic visions, they're attempts to describe an altered state, a contact between matter and meaning. In that instant, the priest became Ra. The ritual worked. Of course, history moved on. The rites faded, temples fell silent, and the journey of Ra became a story instead of an experience. But traces of that living practice survive in the labyrinthine corridors beneath the temples, in the haunting geometry of tombs, in the alignment of stars over Karnak. Every structure seems to whisper the same secret. They built their religion not to worship death, but to practice resurrection. And the manual for that resurrection still exists, waiting quietly in painted scrolls and crumbling papyri, the Book of the Hidden Sun. It promised that anyone who truly understood its symbols could follow Ra's path through darkness and return with the dawn. Whether that dawn meant life after death or something even greater is the mystery we turn to next. There is a sound to ancient paper when it breathes dry brittle like wind passing through hollow bone. Imagine the priests of Thebes unrolling a scroll in the lamplight, the ink dark as spilled blood, the words shimmering with the power of names not meant to be spoken aloud. This was the Book of the Hidden Sun, known today as the Duat, literally that which is in the underworld. It wasn't a myth, at least not in the way we use the word. It was a guidebook, a technical manual for eternity. The Duat appears first in the tomb of Thutmose III, the warrior pharaoh whose architects painted its instructions across every wall of his burial chamber, like the schematics of a machine. Each line corresponds to an hour of night. Each illustration marks a stage of transformation. Ra the sun enters the first hour as an aging king and emerges from the 12th reborn as a child of light. Between those points, he dies 1,000 symbolic deaths. He dismembers himself into stars. He fuses with Osiris. He confronts the serpent of chaos, then becomes the scarab that pushes dawn into being. For the ancient Egyptians, this wasn't poetry. It was procedure. You can trace the discipline of the priests we met in the previous chapter in every line of the text. The phrasing is methodical, the tone instructional. He speaks. The gate opens. He breathes. The serpent withdraws. It reads less like prayer than command, as though words themselves were switches in a cosmic mechanism. And yet the Duat is not purely mechanical. Hidden between its instructions are passages of startling intimacy, moments when Ra confides fear, when even a god doubts the return of light. Those lines may be the oldest recorded expressions of existential anxiety in human history. The priests were not just engineers of faith, they were its witnesses. The book's origins are as mysterious as its contents. Fragments appear on coffin boards, dating back to the Middle Kingdom, suggesting that for centuries, its knowledge was reserved for initiates who memorized it before burial. To know the Duat was to carry a map of the afterlife within your mind. By the time of the New Kingdom, the text had become canonical, painted on tomb walls, so the dead could read it in the dark. Egyptologists have identified multiple recensions, each slightly altered, as if the book evolved through practice refined by those who dared to use it, and use it they did. The rituals we discussed earlier, the fasts, the descents, the simulated deaths, were structured around the Duat's 12-hour journey. But more than that, the priests believed the book contained a secret rhythm, a hidden geometry of light. Each gate, each god, each serpent corresponded to celestial patterns, the arcs of stars, the precession of planets, even the pulse of the Nile's flooding. In this sense, the Duat wasn't only about the underworld. It was about the cosmos as a living organism breathing in time with Ra's nightly voyage. One obscure papyrus from the late period known as the Book of Caverns expands the Duat's logic even further. It describes a vast reservoir of light beneath the earth, a hidden sun that powers creation from below. Scholars debate whether this idea was metaphorical or astronomical. Some see echoes of geothermal vents, others of the molten core, though the Egyptians couldn't have known such things. Yet the notion feels strangely prescient, a world sustained by invisible fire, by an energy that must cycle through death to remain alive. Of course, not everyone accepts these interpretations. Many Egyptologists caution that reading the Duat as science risks erasing its spiritual depth. They argue that its power lies precisely in its ambiguity, the way it collapses physical, psychological, and cosmic realities into one continuous narrative. For the Egyptians, the underworld wasn't separate from the sky. The same sun that set in the west rose in the east. The same God who died each night was reborn each morning. The Duat simply made that rhythm intelligible, and yet the text hides something even deeper. In one section, Ra declares, "I am the soul that becomes millions." It's a line so simple, it almost passes unnoticed. But within it is an idea so radical that later religions would spend centuries trying to contain it, that divinity is multiplicity, that the God is not one being, but all being. When Ra divides himself into millions of forms, he is not diminishing, he is expanding. Light scattered into infinite consciousness. You might recall how in earlier chapters we traced the physical echoes of the Duat beneath the sands, tunnels, chambers, shafts of alignment. Now imagine those structures not as tombs, but as externalizations of the Duat architecture made scripture. The Book of the Hidden Sun wasn't just written, it was built. Every corridor, every vault, every hidden void was a sentence carved in stone, designed to teach the initiate through movement what words could only hint at. The temples were pages. The priests were readers who walked their text. There's a quiet poetry in that thought. Knowledge not recited but inhabited. Salvation not believed but experienced. The Egyptians, in their serene and terrifying way, had turned enlightenment into infrastructure. And somewhere in the dust of Thebes, in the cracks of forgotten walls, the faint traces of that experiment still remain. By the time of the later dynasties, the Duat's teachings had fractured. Copies grew corrupt, meanings blurred, but the core idea endured, that immortality was not granted, but learned. A discipline, a study, a science of the soul. And all of it, every spell, every gate, every serpent and star, pointed to, one moment, the return of dawn. Because if Ra's hidden sun could rise again after crossing the abyss, then so could we. And in the final chapters of this story, we'll see how the Egyptians tried to turn that idea into reality by engineering the dawn itself. You can almost hear it, the faint hum of air, as the desert cools before sunrise. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, the first edge of gold pushes against the horizon. For the ancient Egyptians, this moment wasn't merely the start of a new day. It was the culmination of an entire cosmic system, a triumph achieved through ritual architecture and calculation. The dawn didn't just happen, it was engineered. Every temple in Egypt, from Abu Simbel in the south to Heliopolis in the north, was built as an instrument of resurrection. Their alignment wasn't decorative, it was deliberate. Archaeologists have measured their axes with satellite precision, discovering that many point directly toward the rising sun on specific feast days, solstices, equinoxes, or the birthdays of gods. In the Temple of Amun at Karnak, the central passage glows like a blade of fire on the winter solstice, illuminating the sanctuary at the heart of the complex for just a few moments each year. To the priests, this wasn't coincidence. It was proof that their rituals had succeeded, that Ra had made it through the Duat and risen again. But beyond the architectural precision lay something more profound, the belief that humanity could participate in the mechanics of the cosmos. The priests of Ra saw themselves not as passive worshippers, but as operators within a vast machine. The Duat and the Book of the Hidden Sun weren't just stories, they were blueprints for maintaining equilibrium. If the world was a clock, the temples were its gears, and each sunrise was a reignition of that divine engine. Even the smallest detail reflected this obsession with synchronization. The Temple of Edfu was designed so that light would strike the face of Horus's statue at the precise moment the morning hymn was sung. The stretching of the cord ceremony performed before construction began involved astronomer priests using the constellation of Orion to fix the temple's orientation. When Ra's rays entered those walls, they weren't just lighting stone, they were awakening godhood inside it. And through that awakening, life above and below continued. You might remember how in the last section, we explored the Duat as a manual for the sun's rebirth. The Egyptians went one step further. They turned that manual into physical form. Each temple represented one stage of the sun's journey. Luxor was the place of conception, Karnak, the place of emergence, Dendera, the sky's ceiling, Abydos, the gate of the dead. Pilgrimage across these sacred sites wasn't symbolic, it was participation in Ra's endless cycle. To walk from one temple to another was to walk through the hours of night into morning. At Abu Simbel, this concept reached its most breathtaking expression. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the rising sun penetrates the inner sanctuary, illuminating the statues of Ra Harakti and Ramses II, while leaving the figure of Ptah, god of darkness, in shadow. It is as if the temple itself performs a miniature resurrection light, defeating night within a stone body. The precision is staggering, calculated across millennia. Whatever else the Egyptians believed, they understood something profound about the dialogue between architecture and the sky. Some modern theorists, perhaps too enchanted, suggest that this engineering of dawn hints at lost technologies, solar observatories, energy conduits, even machines for harnessing cosmic power. The evidence doesn't support such fantasies, but the impulse behind them isn't wrong. The Egyptians were indeed harnessing energy, the oldest kind human intention, aligned with celestial rhythm. In their worldview, thought, sound, and geometry were all frequencies of the same divine current. To chant the right hymn at the exact moment the sun touched stone was to merge human consciousness with the pulse of creation. Yet the perfection of their design hides a quiet melancholy. They knew the sun would always set again, that every triumph carried its own undoing. So they built for repetition, not permanence. Their monuments weren't static. They were calendars, resonant engines designed to remind the universe to begin again. In the cryptic words of one inscription from Heliopolis, "I built this for the day when I must rebuild." It's easy now under electric light to forget how much faith it took to greet dawn as an achievement. But to stand in that ancient silence, to feel the first warmth spill through columns that have waited thousands of years for it, is to sense what those priests knew, that renewal is not guaranteed. It must be called forth, guarded, constructed. Every sunrise is a victory. And so the priests of Ra kept their vigil night after night, century after century, tuning their lives to the heartbeat of the sun. The Duat wasn't beneath them anymore. It was within them. They carried it in their breath, in their architecture, in their pulse. When the light finally broke over the eastern horizon, they didn't see just a star rising. They saw proof that knowledge, devotion, and design could move the heavens. The Egyptians may have believed that immortality belonged only to the gods, but by building systems that could resurrect the sun, they found their own path toward eternity. And in that realization lies the final secret of the journey, one that speaks not just of dawn, but of what lies beyond it. Because if the sun could be engineered to rise forever, then perhaps death itself was never the end. It was only the blueprint for light. The dawn comes slowly now. The last of the stars fade and the horizon burns with a quiet gold. The priests are gone, the temples are silent. The chants have turned to dust, but the light remains. It always does. Somewhere within that constancy lies Egypt's final secret, that immortality was never a promise. It was a process. And Ra's journey through the underworld wasn't just the story of a god, it was the blueprint for eternity itself. You've walked beside him through darkness, through serpents and shadows, through gates that open only for those who remember the right names. You've watched him die each night and rise each morning, not as miracle, but as inevitability. That perhaps was the Egyptians' greatest revelation, that the divine isn't separate from the world. It is the world endlessly renewing itself through pattern, rhythm, and return. In the quiet between heartbeats, they found eternity. Not in escape, but in repetition. The Duat wasn't hell. It was the mechanism of balance, the unseen machinery that kept light from drifting too far away. When Ra passed through it, he didn't conquer death. He negotiated with it. He acknowledged that even the brightest light needs darkness to define its shape. And in doing so, he made peace with forever. The great mystery of Egypt was never about mummified kings or golden tombs. It was about transformation, about understanding that death is not an ending, but a turn in an endless current. The priests believed that by studying the sun, by tracing its hidden voyage through shadow, they could synchronize their own souls with that rhythm. To live in harmony with Ra was to learn the art of eternal motion, to rise, fall, and rise again as all things must. And in a way, their experiment worked. The monuments they built still catch the same light they worshipped. The equations of their alignments still solve themselves each morning. Even now, in the hush of dawn, the stones of Karnak blaze gold, as if Ra himself has just stepped back into the world. The temples may be ruins, but their purpose endures to remind anyone who looks that eternity was engineered here. So as the story fades, imagine standing once more on the western bank of the Nile. The air is cool, the sand pale as bone, the river whispering like time itself. The sun lifts over the horizon, slow and effortless. For a moment, you understand what the priests meant when they said light was a living thing, that it could die and yet never be gone. That immortality isn't somewhere else. It's here in every breath, every sunrise, every act of renewal. You close your eyes, and it feels almost like being pulled into that warmth, like the God himself has invited you aboard the barque of morning. You can let go now. The gates are open, the journey complete. Ra sails onward, carrying your heartbeat with his own through the endless sky of becoming. Sleep now in that light. Drift with it. It will return for you as it always has, as it always will.